Canada, the true north, strong and free. But are we really that free? I'm Deanna Zed, and this is Canada and Canadian shit. Now, in case you've been living under a rock or just coming out of a coma, well, I've got a little bit of news for you. Just a little bit. It's not really a big thing, but here it goes. Okay, sit down, get ready. Right-wing governments are in power in a lot of places around the world. Yeah, so turn on the TV and you'll see little tidbits of video of people protesting against these right-wing governments and their stranglehold over their population by austerity measures. But this is a show about Canada, so what does this have to do about Canada? I mean, we have long eyelashed Justin Trudeau in the government. And he's pretty cool, right? I mean, well, you probably don't know this, seeing as you've been living under a rock or you just came out of a coma, but he legalized pot. Yeah, so he's got to be pretty cool, right? Well, so Trudeau is the federal government, but then each province has their own government, and a lot of our provinces now have right-wing governments, and Trudeau is just kind of like sitting back and letting shit happen. So yeah, all over the world people are rising up, and it's happening in Canada too. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the east and move on to the west, okay, and see what's happening. So in Quebec, here in Quebec, I say here because I'm in Quebec, Montreal. Hello, salut. Quebec has, for the past few years, been hit with its own austerity measures. And daycares and schools and the health system. Anything public. Anything public. If you get up in the morning and you go to your 9 to 5 job, well, chances are you're pretty pissed off. I'm pretty pissed off. I work in daycare, and we got hit a few years ago with austerity. So we had to rework our schedule. So now instead of working 5 days, the girls are working 4 days a week. So, we're making less money. And this is province-wide. In fact, it's Canada-wide. So Quebec isn't doing all that well. And now with the CAQ government, that's the CAQ, which means Coalition pour l'Avenir du Québec. The Coalition for the Future of Quebec. Future. Yeah, our future or their future. So François Legault is the head of the CAQ. And he's continuing the austerity measures that were installed by the president, leader of Quebec. And so not only is he continuing the austerity measures, but he's installed this new law, which many people are calling the anti-Muslim law. So if you're working in the public sector, you can't have your hijab on. No, we want to see all of you. And what this does is divide the people. And we all know divide and then conquer. And so Quebec is living its own hell right now. And I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, and I join the marches, and I'm very outspoken about what's going on here. Now, moving on to Ontario, and that crazy motherfucker, the right-wing Doug Ford. Well, Doug Ford, he's going after the public workers as well. Teachers and nurses, and let's not forget the poor. So he's cutting public funding, and he's actually getting quite a boner imagining how he's going to hit strikers on the top of their heads. Yeah, he wants to eliminate the right to strike. So, just let's all just lay back, lay down, and not even getting lubed up. We're just going to get fucked over. So, it's not looking good in Ontario either. Now, in Saskatchewan, you have a right wing named Scott Moe. And so my memory doesn't fail me. Let me get to my notes here. Scott Moe in Saskatchewan. The oil refinery workers are on strike, and for good reason. They want better pay and better retirement plans, like everybody. You work your life. Well, when you're too old to work, of course you want to. We're not talking about being rich and driving around in Audis and BMWs, but just to have a realistic retirement plan. So the workers are striking at the oil refinery, and of course, well, government doesn't want that, and so they are, of course, again being stomped on. The scabs are being let through, and the delivery trucks are being let through, and so no more right to strike. That's what they're going for in Ontario. Alberta, home of oil and gas and the tar sands. Well, Alberta also is going after teachers and nurses, and you might say, oh well, teachers and nurses they're unionized, and so well if there's a problem, then you've got to talk with your union, right? Well, what happens is that while unions, in some cases, protect the workers, in the end, the unions are just little sluts for the government. And so the unions are actually backing behind closed doors. They don't want anybody to talk about it. But the unions are backing these austerity measures and not helping as they should their workers. So, Alberta. Yeah. So, union-backed arbitrator imposes pay freezes on Alberta teachers and nurses. Yeah. So, thanks, unions. I pay my union, and I'm still losing out. Yeah. So unions, they're good on one hand, and then they fuck over the workers on the other hand for the corporatist elites. Now, going to the west of Alberta to British Columbia. I'm sure that if you haven't heard about what's going on in Quebec and Ontario and Saskatchewan and Alberta, I'm sure you've heard about what's going on in northern British Columbia with the First Nations land protectors, more specifically the Wet'suwet'en people who are out there trying to block the natural gas pipeline that the government wants to install. And what I find disgusting in this story, actually there are a few things that I find disgusting, but the NDP here in Canada, the New Democratic Party of Canada, they like to tout themselves as being for the people. They're green, but they're not. And in fact, the NDP leader in British Columbia is actually really pissed off that the First Nations are blocking this natural gas line. And he too wants to stomp on their head. Now, in British Columbia, corporate Canada clamors for Trudeau to launch a violent crackdown on anti-pipeline protesters. Yeah, Canada's business elite and the corporate media are clamoring for the federal Liberal government to authorize a violent police crackdown on anti-pipeline protests that have spread across the country this week. The protests and don't let up. You have the Mohawks here in Quebec and Ontario. They're blocking the train line. So of course Via Rail and CN are really pissed off because they're losing money. Via Rail is for the people traveling around, and CN is merchandise. And all kinds of merchandise, but also they've got their long, round train cars filled up of oil. So yeah, you've got Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, and also the ports on the east and the west coast are being blocked. So I'm really happy about that. Keep it up. Now, yeah, the roadblocks were designed to prevent construction of the Coastal Gas Link pipeline from the northeastern British Columbia to Kitimat Pacific Coast Port. It's mind-blowing. It's just so mind-blowing, and it's so frustrating how governments will tout their green policies. And yeah, okay, I mean, Trudeau, he legalized pot. But that's just because this is another story for another time, but just briefly, he's such a fake. He legalized it because he has rich friends that are following the cannabis money and are now in the business of growing pot. So, but for the people, he didn't legalize it for the people. So the hypocrisy has no bounds. There's no end, and they twist themselves into pretzels to justify what they're doing. And sadly, the Canadian people are divided. Not only are you divided between the left and the right, and the rich and the poor, but we're also divided if you're a teacher, you're going to protest. If you're in the health service, you're going to protest. If you're poor, you're going to protest. If you're this, you're going to protest. If you're that, you're going to protest. And so there's all of these little, if you're for the environment, you're going to protest. So everybody is divided, and there's all these little marches, and some are bigger than others. But what we really have to do as global citizens is put all of our differences aside and get together and shut down the railroads and the highways and the ports so nothing moves. So we stop the capitalist, corporatist wheel from turning. And what's so sad is that we're not rich, and to lose a day, can't even imagine losing a week of work to go and protest. And now to get arrested or to get bitten by a dog. I mean, these are scary times. And the government is letting these corporations have the police and the military backing them up to break us down. But we will not be broken. We will continue, and we will have justice. Thank you so much for listening. Don't like, share, comment. Thanks for being there. I'm Deanna Zed, and this is Canada and Canadian Shit.